Alright folks, how are you doing? It's Shabash and welcome to my ultimate Orna beginner's guide. I'm going to be explaining to you the basic mechanics and features of the game in hopefully a clear and concise way, easy to understand format. I've also got a written guide version of this, by the way. That's up on the Orna Legends website, link in the description to that below. As always, feel free to comment below with any questions you may have. I'll do my best to get round to them. And also feel free to pop into the stream. I'm going to be streaming on Twitch at Shabash TV. We'll be able to help you out, answer any of your questions in detail on there. But without any further ado, let's light a fire under this and get started. So Orna is a very classical fantasy RPG game using turn-based combat in an open world. You kill mobs, you kill bosses, etc. to level up, gain experience to get stronger items. So you can kill stronger mobs to level up and get more stronger items, etc, etc. That's the core gameplay loop. And I said open world, you can't really get more open world than this. It uses OpenStreetMap to augment the real world into the game world, or the other way around, I'm not too sure. So it's quite similar to a game like Pokemon Go if you ever played that. Unlike that game, however, mobs always spawn in Orna ad infinitum. In Pokemon Go, you catch a Pokemon nearby and nothing's there. Once it's gone, once you've caught it, there's nothing else respawning. In Orna, mobs will respawn infinitely on your screen, so you can sit in the same place, kill mob after mob after mob if you so choose. And of course, like Pokemon Go, if you want to move around in the game world, you have to also move around in the real world. Have to get out, use some leg power. I like to go on a bicycle or ride shotgun in a car. Those are some of the most efficient ways to play. Looking at the game map, we have things like water and trees, which represent woodland, and other sources of water in real life as well. They can also spawn biome-specific mobs. This big guy on the screen here is a boss. When you kill a boss, it has an 80% chance to respawn in the exact same spot after 3 hours. If it doesn't respawn there after 3 hours, it means a new boss has actually taken its place somewhere within 2 kilometers or so. But you will see plenty of bosses, especially if you move around, and of course they give greater rewards, more experience, more gold, more orns, as you might expect. So let's kill this boss here, just as an example, and then hopefully in 3 hours time I'll check and we'll see if it respawns or not. So obviously moving the map around, you can see the real world augmented into the game world. We can also find NPCs out in the world, such as this guy. Talk to them and they will give you certain quests. Each NPC will have their own unique quest, which you can do once, and they now also give you random quests such as these two down here. So there is a main storyline in Orna which I strongly suggest you follow and complete. There are some good items along the way, and you might realize that NPCs tend to change their location around every few months or so as well. We of course have buildings in the game as well, which I've currently filtered out because my hometown is a bit of a mess here, but we'll come on to these later. So this map filter option is really solid as well for cleaning up your gameplay. You can hide monsters even if you only want to find bosses in the world and you're traveling around, easy to click on them. You also have raid bosses in the game, such as this one, the Morrigan. This is from a kingdom raid, which acts like the guild function in Orna. Leveling up into the mid to end game, you also find world raid bosses as well, which tend to be pretty strong and have some decent gear as well. Quests that require you to kill certain mobs will generally be easy to spot with the yellow exclamation mark above their head, such as this little draconian rogue. You can see tells you which daily quest it is, job number 2. Daily quests are handed in automatically once you complete them, but for NPCs, the story quest and in quest and even your keep quest as well, you will have to manually go in and complete those quests. Finally, on NPCs there are a limited number of them, so you will see the same one over and over again, especially if you're traveling. Alright, let's talk about my favorite GPS feature in Orna, and that is areas. You can access the areas tab at the bottom right here, clicking on the blue shield. You can also select an option to show area grid lines on your map. I'm Earthen Legion faction, so these green lines you can barely see on the map. These dictate who is in control of that area, and they will show the same color relative to the controller's factions. Green on green, obviously it's hard to see. You can just make out these faint area grid lines. So areas have an approximate diameter of 442 meters, and you have to be within 250 meters of an area's center to be able to interact with it. I can show you here, there's an area which is, I'm 239 meters away from this area, so I can actually interact with it, even though I'm outside of this area. And if you see an area with a grey outline, that means nobody's ever been in control of it. It might have newly spawned. New areas will spawn in land that travelers haven't traveled to yet. So areas actually have a PvP and a PvE aspect to them. And we'll talk about PvP first. If you go in the control tab, you will see the player who is currently in control of that area. Player in control of the area can only be attacked once per hour by any other player. So if you're playing in a really busy city center, you might have to be fast to get any attacks in. It's effectively an arena battle, but you don't need any arena tokens, but you will use your arena loadout, your PvP loadout for equipment and spells. Really interesting thing, however, on area defense, if you control multiple surrounding areas, your defensive AI will actually be more powerful. And you can tell how modified you'll be by looking at the influence, which you can see down here. You have 3 types of influence. Duke influence, which is how many of the surrounding areas are owned by the same player. And then kingdom and faction influence, same idea. If areas are owned by the same kingdom or by the same faction, you'll have, your stats will be majorly bumped up and you'll be much harder to take down, thus encouraging you to take many surrounding areas as well. So you have to be within 250 meters of an area center to be able to interact and to be able to attack other people in control of that area. I'll just show you quickly. When you take control of an area, that adds 1 reputation to your record. So if you go in your status, then you can check your record. You can see I've got almost 5,000 reputation here. At the start of lockdown, I was in control of 8,000 areas, but I've not been out much recently over 2020, and I'm a big fan of reputation as a game feature. You can actually check the competitive leaderboard. That's mainly dictated around how many areas people are in control of. You can see the top guy over 100,000 rep, Vice, my man, 57,000 rep. Okay, so let's talk about the PvE aspect of areas, and that is Guardians. Guardians could be a random monster or boss as well, and they'll be like defending an area, and you have to defeat them in battle to be able to explore that area. So you can see nearby I've got loads of these random mobs. I've obviously defeated all of them. Unlike the PvP control, you can attack the area garden as many times as possible. You will quite often have debuffs on you, like lowered attack, lowered magic at the start of battle, and likewise the Guardian will commonly have positive buffs affecting them. You might even start the battle frozen or asleep. So there's a lot of RNG involved, so taking the Guardian down will mean you have explored the area. Once you've either explored or controlled an area, that will allow you to gain income from that area. So you can see this area, I get 1 red Draconite per month, and it's not doubled. If you've either explored or in control of that area, you will gain income from it. So 1 hide per month, I get a random weapon per month, 1 piece of realm ore per month, which is actually pretty nice. Some orange as well. Orange is generally the nice one. I mean, these are never going to be a massive income for any player. I think I get roughly 7,000 orange per day, which at endgame is basically nothing. But the thing about defeating Guardians is they give double rewards. If you're on a road trip or traveling on the train or a bus or whatever, and you've got shrines, you've got maybe temples up with your kingdom, even if it's a double experience or double orange weekend, killing Guardian bosses are the ultimate way to level up to get orange. It's absolutely crazy what you can do. Again, another reason where traveling out and about, engaging with the GPS feature is real benefit to progressing in Orna. You can also rename areas that you're in control of for 100,000 orns. You can receive notifications for people taking areas from you. So you can see Oblin, local badass, taking a few areas from me recently. If you don't see a name, that means that player has privacy on. So typically you will see the class and the faction take you down. So if you're wondering what that is, for example, Magistrate of Frozen Guard took such and such area away from you, that just means they have privacy settings on. One other benefit to owning areas, if you are in an area under your control, you actually get a 5% stat boost while playing in that area. And even better than that is you get a 10% stat boost when you're playing in your origin town. Now, origin town is a very important aspect. You're allowed to change your origin town once every 7 days, but effectively, if you haven't selected an origin town yet, I highly recommend you make the origin town the area you play the most. So if you're playing at home, like a lot of us will be at the moment, for the majority of your time, just make the origin town your home area. It will tell you at the top here, this is your origin town, and you get a 10% stat boost, which is pretty insane to be honest. That affects world farming, gauntlets, PvP as well even, and raids as well. So if you're wondering why you do less damage to raids when you're not at home in your origin town, it's probably because origin town bonus. So it's a good feature. You can change your origin town once every 7 days. If you're going away on holiday for a while, you can take your origin town away with you. Just be careful as well, because you will always appear to yourself as being the owner of your origin town when in fact you might not be. I didn't realize this for about 12 months after playing. After I'd been away and changed my origin town, then I came home and realized somebody was actually in control of my area. So you should be able to notice that by influence actually if you own all those other surrounding areas. If your Duke influence isn't maxed, for example mine was setting down here as I was playing at the beginning of the game, that should let you know that somebody's actually in control of your origin town. So let's kill this Draconian Robe then. You can long tap on mobs to immediately start the fight. Of course, like most RPGs, you have health and mana. Shouldn't really need to explain them. If you run out of health, you're going to die. Dying doesn't matter at all in this game. You don't lose any experience or items or anything like that. There's no hardcore. You can just use potions to heal yourself back up, or you can even close the game down and you will regenerate 1% of health and mana per minute. The purple bar here is your ward. Ward acts like an extra health pool. You can use certain skills which change the amount of absorption that goes to ward before health. For example, there are some skills which improve your absorption to 85% and even 100%. That'll make incoming damage take your ward down first before your HP. Of course, you use mana to cast spells and skills. And then on killing any kind of mob, any player in PvP or bosses in the game, you're going to get experience, you're going to get gold, and you're going to get orns, and you're also going to get some items depending on what you killed. So of course experience is used to level up. There's a maximum of 250 levels for your character in this game. Gold is predominantly used for buying items and potions from shops. You'll also need it to upgrade your equipment as well in blacksmiths, but you will quickly realize that you're going to have lots and lots of gold and not know what to do with it. Things don't really get very expensive until much later on into the game, where certain spells or upgrading equipment can cost hundreds of millions of gold. Orns is the big one. Of course, the game is called Orna, after Orns, or it might be after Ornate, I don't know. But Orns kind of acts like a premium currency in this game, even though you cannot buy it. There's no RMT, there's no pay to win in this game at all. You can't buy Orns for cash. You have to earn your Orns. Orns is going to be used for unlocking new classes, switching between your specializations, also unlocking pets as well. Certain good quality equipment will also need Orns to upgrade, and you'll also need them to build buildings. So for the majority of the game, you're going to be stockpiling your Orns in order to save up for the next class upgrade, or if you want to switch specializations and buying new pets. Those are the main Orn sinks in the game. And then of course we have items and materials dropping from certain mob types as well. There is a bit of a drop table in Orna, so you can target farm for specific items from specific monsters. There's a very good online database on the website Orna Guide, and you can search for items in there and see which monsters drop them. We can see here I've also auto-dismantled some of the equipment into materials. You will need specific materials to upgrade all of your items. And the last one which I missed was Kingdom Gold. If you're in a kingdom, which is basically the guild function in Orna, any mobs or bosses you kill will grant a certain amount of Kingdom Gold for the kingdom, and that amount cannot actually be increased in any way. And upon your character reaching level 10 in the game, you'll be able to choose what faction you want to join. The choices are based on the 4 basic elements, and there's not really a wrong choice. I just chose what flavor text resonated with me the most. There are a few things that this choice affects gameplay wise. Firstly, kingdoms. If you want to join and play with your mates in the same kingdom, you actually have to be part of the same faction. You can only join kingdoms of your own faction. So if we quickly check the kingdom leaderboard, you can see the top 4 here are actually all one of each faction. We'll talk about kingdoms later on anyway. The next important thing to note regarding factions is that you will do 25% more damage using the element of your faction, and you will receive 25% less damage from the element of your respective faction. So for me personally, I'm in the Earthen Legion. I will do 25% extra damage using Earth skills and receive 25% less damage from Earth type abilities. Certain mobs in the game will be immune or resistant or weak to these certain elements. On top of the 4 basic elements, there's another 4 different elements: Arcane, Dragon, Dark and Holy. There's currently no playable faction linked to those elements. There is kind of another element in the game which is physical. It might not be very obvious, but certainly with a lot of attack skills, you'll actually be doing physical damage. We can see here on this Arisen Great Gazer, if I use a physical spell Lunge, you can see it's immune. Lunge is a specific skill which uses the physical element. Other attack skills like Tricut will actually use the element of your weapon. Now if your weapon doesn't have an element on it, it will use physical. Currently my weapon has Earth element on it, so if I use Tricut, we should be able to damage it. Now don't worry, you can actually change faction in the game. You have to go in the rune shop, and it does cost $1 basically. But you go in the rune shop, go to the other tab, and you can faction reset for 99 cents. You do have to be not in a kingdom to have this option available to you. So let's talk about tiers and tier progression in Orna. Tiers are basically dictated by your character level. Every 25 levels your character will enter a new tier, and they are used as a way of introducing new content to the player, to the character as well. There's currently 11 tiers in the game. Max level 250 is tier 11, is basically no content at the game. It's basically tier 10 content at the end game there. So there's essentially 10 tiers of content, which obviously gets progressively harder, and every time you reach a new tier you're going to be able to unlock new things like classes, specializations, new pets are going to be available for you to buy, new monsters are going to spawn, new bosses are going to be in the wild to spot. Obviously that's going to mean there's going to be new equipment for you available to wear. Typically that's going to be stronger and going to allow you to do more damage, allow you to kill things faster, allow you to kill harder things as well. You're also going to find new quests available for you, both in the storyline, in dailies, and from NPCs. And then finally in Kingdoms you're going to be able to get gear from the higher tier raids. So the tier system essentially starts at level 0. You're going to reach tier 2 at level 25. You're going to reach tier 3 at level 50. And obviously in the early game you're leveling up pretty fast. You're going to power through the tiers quite easily. And for monsters in the world, you're only going to be able to see monsters of the same tier or lower than you. For bosses, you can actually see bosses 1 tier higher than you in the wild. That's true all the way up to tier 9. Tier 9 players cannot see tier 10 bosses. So that's actually one way you can find really strong equipment for your tier, is if you can defeat higher tier bosses than you. You're going to get relatively strong items for your level. So for example, on this character, I'm tier 11, and we can see mobs which are tier 1. This Goblin Mage, you can see it's level 24. Once you play the game for a while, you're going to know what monsters are part of which tier, etc. This is level 24, tier 1, This golem, level 75, basically the max level tier 3 monster. Oh, actually, it has the stars at the top of the character. I didn't see that first. This one, yeah, tier 4. So actually on the character screen, it's not going to tell you anywhere what tier you're in. You're going to have to work it out for yourself from your level. But essentially, as we said, leveling up through the tiers is going to allow you to unlock new characters, new classes. And so let's talk about the class progression system. And we'll bring up this class progression tree. Credit to Lollygeddon for producing this. This is not my doing. I really love this infographic. Each level you go up a new tier. It tells you how many Orns you need to unlock the class. Also shows you which classes are needed to unlock the upper tier classes. The little weapon icon dictates what kind of gear that class can wear as well. Some classes can wear multiple types of gear. And you can see the Orn cost does get pretty heavy going up through the tiers, but remember, you're going to be killing higher tier mobs anyway, and they're going to give you increased Orn rewards as well. So honestly, the progression is pretty good. As long as you're doing different parts of the game, like achievements, quests, you're doing dungeons, PvP, you're going to get Orns from many different sources. Now, to be clear, any class that you unlock is free to switch between once you've unlocked it. So I've unlocked Gilgamesh here. I've also unlocked the Heretic class. I can freely switch my class to Heretic, and class change successful, it's done. Any skills you learn from unlocking a class will be permanently available for you to use on any other class that you wish. So for example, I go into Gilgamesh, I see the skills, unlocks Guardian Strikes 3. So just to show you, you can go into your spell loader, I'm a Heretic class, type in Guarding Strikes 3, and there you can see I can equip Guarding Strikes 3. Now, this is not true of specializations. Specializations are like your subclass. You'll be able to choose new specializations at tiers 3, 5, 7, and 9. They are not free to switch between. You will have to pay Orns every time you switch. And the skills and abilities are not permanent either. So to show you, I'm currently Cataphract Spec, and these are the skills that I learned as Cataphract Spec. The big one is actually Prism Wall down the bottom here. So I will show you, I can currently equip Prism Wall skill. I've got it equipped in my loadout now. If I change specialization to Magi, we check the skills we learn. We actually learn Great Meditation 1 and 2. It costs 200,000 Orns, and the game tells you that you must pay again to return to your current spec. It doesn't tell you that you don't learn the skills, you don't keep the skills, but anyway, we've learned new skills. And if we go into our spell loadout, you'll be able to see the Prism Wall is not there anymore. Any skills you learn from specs, you're only going to be available to you while you're that spec. So we can type Great Meditation here, and we can see Great Meditation 1 and 2 are available for us to equip. If you're low tier, remember that the first specialization you choose is actually free. So I kind of recommend waiting to tier 5 before picking your first spec. It will save you 25,000 Orns in upgrading from a tier 3 to a tier 5 spec, so little tip for you there. Orns are definitely hard to come by early on. Another piece of tier gated content is the arena. You're only going to fight people in the arena the same tier as you, so that might explain why if you've been fighting in the arena and you've been killing people really easily, you might have leveled up, and then all of a sudden you're fighting people who are 25 levels ahead of you and you can't beat anyone. It's probably because you've gone up a tier while fighting in the arena. Arena actually gives really good rewards. They've been upgraded. You can see at tier 10 you get 1200 Orns. A lot of experience early on, you know, definitely a good place to level up. You get arena tokens from a lot of bosses. You also find them in shops, get them as daily rewards as well, even quest rewards sometimes. Okay, let's now talk about itemization, one of the most important parts of any good RPG. And in Orna it's no different. It's a really massive source of power in Orna for any character, and it follows the same tier progression that we just talked about. Going up into new tiers are going to allow you to find much stronger equipment. And the first thing we'll talk about is actually gear restrictions. Now it's based on the first 3 classes in the game, Warrior, Mage and Thief. Throughout the entire game at every tier you're going to have equipment which can only be worn by Warrior classes or Mage classes or Thief classes. Those are the 3 archetypes, of course. There is also, of course, items which can be worn by any class without any restrictions at all. There are quite a few classes throughout the tiers that can wear more than one type of equipment, maybe 2 or even all kinds of gear. For example, the tier 10 Beowulf can wear any kind of gear whatsoever. Also, the deity can wear any kind of gear. Generally in the class selection menu, it's going to tell you what kind of gear you can wear and what you cannot wear. Also in the class infographic that Lollygeddon made, it tells you as well. So we can see deity, these skilled warriors can wield any weapon or piece of equipment found. Beowulf can wield any piece of equipment found. Realm Shifter can wield equipment of the rogue, so this can wear Thief only gear. Heretic similarly can only wear mage gear, and Gilgamesh can only wear warrior gear as well. Throughout the mid game there's a couple of tiers where classes can literally wear anything, and you know, you come out of that tier level up and all of a sudden you've got no stats, like you can't use a piece of good gear. And typically this is the reason why. For example, at tier 5 it's the classic one because all the tier 5 classes can wear any piece of equipment, so If you're a druid, you might have found a nice bit of thief gear, and then you go into the tier 6, you become a battle mage, and it says, look, you can wield equipment of both the warrior and mage. You cannot wear thief gear. So if you've got a thief weapon, weapon's the biggest one probably. If all of your damage is coming from your weapon, and then in the next class, you can't equip that weapon, you're in a bit of trouble. So just bear that in mind, especially throughout the mid game. Have a look ahead, have a read, make sure you know what equipment you can and cannot wear going up into the next tier. While we're talking about classes and gear restrictions, let's talk about preferred weapons as well. Certain classes will get a 5% bonus, which is basically called a weapon proficiency bonus. This bonus applies to both your offensive stats, that's both attack and magic, and essentially you just need to be wearing a preferred weapon. So for the battle mage, either polearms, arcastants, or swords. It's very thematic. The bonus isn't huge throughout the early mid game, but in the later game it does become very significant. Something to bear in mind. You can also get weapon bonus from your specialization. Swashbuckler here has curved sword as a preferred weapon. The ranger has bows and great bows. So it doesn't stack, you only get the weapon bonus once, but you can get it from either your class or your specialization. So let's go into our inventory and talk about item power and explain a little bit about that. So you may have realized already that items drop in different qualities. You can have the same item and it all starts from the base quality, which is known as common in the game. You can imagine that a common item has its stats as 100%, and then there's two qualities which are worse than common, that's poor and broken. That actually reduces the base item stats. And then for equipment, you've got 4 better qualities at common that get rarer as they get better, but going all the way up to ornate, you can have base stats which are exactly twice as good as the common quality stats. So I'll try and find a couple of items to explain this better. Alright, so let's take this tier 10 Lost Art weapon as an example. So here is the common quality one. You can see the main stat on this item is the attack stat, 272 attack. This is the base for this level 1 item. We've got a couple of broken ones here. This broken one has a lower base of 215, and this one is even worse, has a base of 194. So this one has around 71% of the common quality base item stats. And then at the other end of the scale, we've got an ornate Lost Art, which has 501 base attack here. That's about 184% compared to our common quality one. So we'll get the ranges for all the quality on the screen now. It goes from broken all the way up to ornate, and as you level up the item, the differences does get slightly exaggerated as well. So you can see at worst the item is going to be 70% of the base value, and at best it's going to be 200% the base value, giving you the highest stats possible. Obviously the more powerful the item, the rarer it actually is to drop. So ornate is going to be the rarest item to drop, and there's not actually any way to increase the rarity of items found. You can only increase the quantity of items found and kind of brute force your way to finding a better quality item in that way. There's no increased item rarity gem from Path of Exile or something similar. And then the other main source of item power comes from actually leveling items up. This is actually much more important than a lot of new players think, and it's very easy. You can upgrade our items to level 10 using a blacksmith, upgrade it to level 11, which is called master forging. You do that in an alchemist, and then you can use a demonologist to demon forge your item to effectively level 12. And for the vast majority of the game, that's going to be the highest level item you're going to get. Just introduced, however, was God Forging. God Forging is only available to tier 9 and 10 players. That essentially makes your item to level 13. You can see I've got one God Forged weapon here, which is level 13. So pragmatically, for the majority of the game, you're going to be leveling items to a maximum of level 10 most commonly. If you're at a certain tier for long enough, you can master forge and then demon forge a weapon. I'll show you now how easy it is to go in the blacksmith. Blacksmith is probably the most important building in the game. If you haven't got a blacksmith nearby, definitely build one as soon as you can. All the item slots covered, shows you what items can be upgraded or not. Accessories cannot be upgraded at all. That's one outstanding thing. Weapons can actually be upgraded to level 3 outside of the blacksmith. You can use whetstone to level it up to level 2, and then a fine whetstone to level it to level 3. Otherwise, you just go in the blacksmith, tap on the weapon, it will tell you what materials you need to upgrade it, how much orns and how much gold it's going to cost, and how long it's going to take as well. In total, taking an item all the way up to level 10, it's going to take 192 hours from level 1, and you're going to need a total of 135 materials of each type. You can see this weapon takes 3 different materials. It's going to need 135 of each material in total. So leveling your good items all the way to level 10 in the blacksmith is going to take, up to 10 days of investment, but actually you can get a lot of power in just one day by taking items up to level 5. Yeah, in total it only takes 11 hours to get an item up to level 5, even less if it's a weapon, and you get a real good power boost taking an item up to there. So if you're in the early to mid game, stick an item in the blacksmith overnight if you can, or even better during the day, and you're definitely going to notice a big power boost. Now, once you level an item all the way up to level 10, you can then master forge it at an alchemist, which is this yellow building here. You can see at the top you can enchant, you can adorn, which I haven't mentioned as well. Most items will have a certain amount of adornment slots that open up, let's say, as you level up the item. And you'll only get the maximum amount of adornment slots for 99.9% of items once you master forge them. There's currently one item in the game which gets its maximum amount of slots at Demon Forge level. That was only a recent introduction. Otherwise, most items you're going to get maximum adornment slots at Master Forge, which is essentially level 11 for the item. So you go into the Master Forge, and you can see here the prices start to get a little bit more expensive. Especially for higher tier items, it's going to cost a lot of gold. This is 1.3 billion gold, which is quite a lot. I'm not going to do this right now. And the material cost to Master Forge an item depends on its quality. Also the same for Demon Forging. Okay, so depending if you're working in decimals or percentages on the quality of the item, Master Forging is essentially going to cost you 3.33 times the quality of the item. For example, if you've got a standard quality item which is 100%, it's going to cost you 333 of each material to Master Forge. If it's a perfect 200% ornate, it's going to cost you effectively double that, so it's going to cost you 666 of each material to Master Forge it. And then once you've Master Forged an item, you can then Demon Forge it, taking it to level 12. And Demon Forging costs twice as much in materials as Master Forging, basically 666 times the quality of original item. So that's where thematically the Demonologist and the 666 etc. comes into it. It's going to cost a lot of gold. I haven't got a local Demonologist to show you that. However, you can actually Master Forge and Demon Forge in your castle once you've leveled up your keep. This is definitely not a beginner's point, but I can show it to you here. Upgrading your keep to a fortress will unlock the Alchemist, and then upgrading the fortress to a castle will unlock the Demon Forge for you. Bear in mind that if you're Master Forging and Demon Forging in your keep, the gold cost is doubled, and the material cost 25% more. So you can see here the same item, it's now almost 2.8 billion gold, and it's 641 of Cursed Ortonite and Greater Soul. So not a bad thing for cheap materials like hide, leather, etc. But for endgame materials, you're definitely going to want to go out and find Alchemist Demon Forged in the wild. I think they're just called Demon Forges now. Again, another reason why you want to scope out your local area and find out where Alchemists and Demon Forges are. So we touched on Adornments briefly as we were looking at the Alchemist, and yes, you can adorn your items with Adornments at Alchemist. You can also do them in a Jeweller, which you can build if you haven't got a local Alchemist nearby. And to adorn, you just tap on the item, and it's going to filter out what Adornments you can actually put in the item itself. They're generally split between weapon only and armor only, and it will cost you a little bit of gold to adorn your items. I'd say in early to mid game, feel free to adorn whatever you want. There's not really anything particularly amazing that you're going to keep until the end game, until you get to tier 7, and that's when you start finding assassin jewels and heretic jewels, which are fairly rare, and they actually decrease your opponent's defense and resistance temporarily, which is really good for raiding. Apart from that, play about with it. Feel free to put adornments in your weapon, get that extra 5 magic, get that extra 10 life. It's not gonna make or break your character, but it's a bit of fun. It will help you feel a little bit stronger. All of these random jewels come from the end of completing dungeons, and it becomes a bit of a nightmare later on to manage your inventory. I've not done it in a while, and you can see all these random jewels building up. Finally, I found these assassin jewels. You can obviously filter quite easily now. I should have done that from the start. So yeah, nice jewels are these assassin jewels and the yellow heretic jewels as well. They're good depending if you're doing attack or magic based builds. Save them for endgame, but by that point you're going to be a fairly intermediate to experienced player anyway. The final type of items we can wear are accessories. You can't upgrade these in the blacksmith or anything like that, but most accessories can actually drop all the way from broken quality all the way up to Demon Forge quality. Master Forge and Demon Forge items are ridiculously rare. Like, don't ever bank on getting one. I've only got one Master Forge item, which is this bag of treats. Got it in October, and I've been playing for quite some time. But the same item quality rules apply to accessories. So you've got your standard quality at 100%, and then you've got ornate quality going up to 200% and above for Master Forge and Demon Forge as well. So we've got this Arisen Ring. It's very easy to tell on Arisen Rings what the quality is because the base is 100 attack and magic. This one is 196, so it's 196%. So actually equipping your items, obviously you go in the equipment screen. Should have told you that from the beginning, but you have different loadouts for different types of content you want to do. If you want to do world farming, gauntlets, you can specify, example for raids, what kind of gear you want to use. Just remember this checkbox. If you actually want to use the equipment, make sure to have that on. If you're doing gauntlets and dungeons, you're just going to tap on an item and it's going to bring you options of what that class can wear I'm currently a thief class, it's not going to show me any warrior gear that I can't wear. So it's very easy to swap between gear. All the stats that you see in the status screen actually come from your world gear loadout as well. So with that world loadout, it's going to show me what stats I see in my stat screen. And at the moment, there's no way to check stats from different loadouts for a gauntlet, for your PvP or your raid loadout. You can only figure out your stats from the world loadout. So it's definitely a very good idea to have different loadouts for different type of content. World gear, later on in the game, you're going to have items that give you increased orns, increased gold, increased experience, and those aren't actually going to have any effect on raid bosses, for example. So for raids, you really want to put your best stat gear on, highest defense, highest resistance, and try and allow you to last as long as possible, do as much damage in the raid, for example. So don't be afraid to change your gear depending on the situation as well. For example, if you've got a war fight and you can see that he's a mage, you're going to expect them to use magic. Stick some resistant gear on, because your fight might be the fight that allows your kingdom to win the war. Very easy to swap between gear. Now Odie's made it really easy to swap gear, even on doing the specific content. For example, in the world, you can tap here at the bottom right and it takes you to the world loadout. You can easily swap. If you're doing dungeons or your gauntlet, you can swap in this screen as well. Very easy. There's currently not an option for that for skills, unfortunately. As a final note on itemization of this game, there is no trading in Orna, and the dev does not want trading in the game. Most of the community do not want trading in the game as well. So it's very much a single player aspect. Any kind of trading economy is just going to ruin this game, in my opinion. It's all about the grind. Yes, you're going to find mage gear when you're a warrior and vice versa, but I'm just saying that because on the main Discord, there's suggestions for introducing trading literally every day. But the way that I've gotten my pieces of gear is just by grinding and just by praying to RNGesus every night. Play the game and items will come. So we've just mentioned the blacksmith and the alchemist to level up our items. Let's talk about the other buildings that we can build and find out in the world in Orna. And let's just start with shops. You can find shops in the wild, and you can also build your own, and you can level them up in the options tab here. See, it's level 10, which is the max level. You can also move or destroy. You can also sell excess items to generate a bit of gold for you, and you can also restock items in shops as well. And as we said earlier, you can buy arena tokens. That's one thing I wanted to mention earlier. When you're just starting out, just buy small health and mana potions, because when you use the auto heal function by long tapping this down here, it's just going to use small potions, and the most cost-effective potions to use are actually the small potions. So if you're just starting out, best case scenario, you've got a shop nearby which you can see, allowing you to buy torches and potions from, ideally a blacksmith as well. If these aren't nearby, I definitely say build a shop as soon as you can. You do that in the area tab. Just go to build. Costs 2,500 orns. As long as you're doing achievements at the early game, you should be able to get this, very easily. And it's going to allow you to keep buying potions so you can keep smashing mobs, which is a very common thing to do in the early game. Bestiary isn't as important. We tend to recommend buying your first pet at tier 4, which is the wisp pet. Pets up to tier 4 can actually appear in wild bestiaries. So I actually recommend building a blacksmith before bestiary. Upgrading gear to level 4 or 5 is going to be much more powerful than having a pet. Yes, you're going to need some stone, you're going to need some wood, you're going to need 10,000 orns. It's going to be the best investment you can make, hands down. You can buy wood and stone in shops. For wood as well, you can buy cheap gear, cheap items which look woody, and you can dismantle them. Things like loots, staffs as well, it's pretty common. Otherwise, you can find stone out in the wild, and stone also drops at tier 3 from the lesser golem, and ogres as well. Best way to find stone. So you can see my home base, I've got a lot of shops. Main reason was to buy items like the arena tokens, monster remains, dowsing rods, and affinity candles. So down here, monster remains, dowsing rods, and affinity candles will occasionally appear in shops for you to buy. Experience potions there, actually, if you run out of experience potions, you can actually buy them for orns in the rune shop. You're going to have loads of lucky silver coins and lucky coins. So the final building that we can build ourselves and we haven't talked about is the bestiary. I've got a wild bestiary here, I'll just show you first. You can hire pets up to tier 4. That's the highest tier pet you can find in the world. If you want to sell your pets, this is also the place to do it. You can also rename your pets here as well. So you can release the pet. Doing that will give you 50% of the orns back, and you can also rename your pet at a bestiary if you so wish. So building your own bestiary, you're going to have to do that to find higher tier pets in the game. And pets, you can see their background. Again, that similar background actually only dictates the rarity of the pet. It doesn't dictate that the pet is better than a lesser quality pet. So currently in the game, the rarest pets have the Master Forge background, and for that reason, you might have to build a large number of bestiaries. You can see here I've built 30 or 40 bestiaries, I think. In the early game, you definitely don't have to do that. Most of the early to mid game really good pets are actually the most common pets. Like, for example, that wisp that we mentioned at tier 4 is a famed rarity, but it's like the best pet for the early game. in my opinion, and a lot of other players' opinions as well. As you can see, cost Orns, hold to take. If you've got a keep, your currently equipped follower will be placed in the keep, and this wisp will be your current follower. You can check follower stats in your status screen. If you go here, go follower, you'll see it has attack, magic, and then the chance to do something, your action chance. We're here, so I'll just explain it. Pet skills are broken down into 4 categories. You've got buffs, debuffs, attack, and spell chance. And depending on what skills your pet actually has, you might not see some of those category chances as well. So for example, Fake Chimera doesn't have any healing skills, so it doesn't have a heal chance. Now each action rate applies per skill. So for example, you can see it has a spell chance of 6%. That actually applies to each individual skill. So it's not just a 6% chance to cast a spell, it's 6% chance to cast each spell individually. So working that out on this Fake Chimera, you can see it's got a 6% chance to cast a spell. Which of its skills are actually classed as spells? That's Wyvern Strikes, Beast Strikes, and Omni Strikes. Those 3 are spells. So each spell has a 6% chance to be cast by your pet, and in total that comes to 17% roughly for this Fake Chimera to cast a spell. It's also got 3% to cast attack, which is just this, and 22% chance to cast the buff, which is this. Once it's cast the buff, then obviously this buff doesn't come into the equation. There are certain items which can increase your pet's action rate and also its power, its attack and magic stats. And obviously there's certain classes and builds which are completely based around your pet as well. So once you've got your first shop, bestiary and blacksmith set up, the next building I recommend you get is definitely going to be your keep. It's not a very important building to build right away. You know, honestly, you can actually wait until tier 7. What it does is it gives you extra room to keep your pets. So for example, I can actually hold lots of pets because I've upgraded my keep to a castle all the way. But initially we recommend rolling with just the one wisp pet for a lot of the early game. If you want to buy more pets and you want to keep them, then go ahead and build a keep sooner. There's absolutely no problems with that whatsoever. You can also invest gold, which gives you like 1% per day. As we said before, gold is not really going to be a limiting factor for you in any way at all. Also, when you initially build a keep, you're going to have the option to run a scout hawk, which shows things like dungeons and NPCs nearby. They're going to show up on your map. You know, I'll just do it now anyway. You can also light the brazier once a day. That's going to make more mobs spawn. Also going to improve your view distance by 20%, and that's on your character wherever you go. So if you're going out, you can light the brazier, and that's going to give you that buff for 60 minutes. You can also find quests from your keep as well, and these are obviously going to be tied to your tier. Typically things like walking around, killing certain mobs. You can level up your keep in the options tab here, and leveling it to 10 will then give you the option to upgrade it to a fortress. That's going to cost you 1 million Orns, but what that does do is give you access to the Alchemist, and it gives you access to your own dungeon, which is very nice. Finally, upgrading your fortress to a castle also unlocks the Demon Forge. And we've already mentioned the advantages and disadvantages of these specific buildings in your fortress or castle. How they make Master Forging and Demon Forging actually cost a lot more. The final 2 buildings we can build ourselves are going to be a Jeweller and refineries. So in the Jeweller you can adorn items. You can also buy adornments. It's very rare to find good ones. Probably the best items you're going to find here, jewels that have 2% ward on them, but they're pretty rare. And then finally we have the refineries, which I've built a few of up here. Essentially, refineries allow you to smelt down material. Depending on the rarity of the material, it's going to output a random number of materials. So the rarer the material, the more materials it's going to put out. And you can tell the rarity of material based on the background. It's similar to items. So I'll just collect these and we go to smelt. You can see things like Balder has the green background, Dragonite has the famed blue background, so that's going to give me more items out than the Balder, which is also going to give me more items out than the Broken Statue, which is just a standard rarity item. So the rarest material currently in the game is the Ortonite. That's going to output the most materials once smelted down. Obviously it's quite a rare material, so I haven't really done it too much. I'm currently burning through thousands and thousands of mithril, but you know, this is not a very exciting part of the game. I've obviously built all these refineries, but these have been stagnant for a couple of weeks now. Now the way to get around building items where you can only have one per area, there's a cheap trick you can do. You can go into your area tab and you can switch area and then go in the build tab, and you can see at the top here you're still in that other area. That's actually going to allow you to build jeweler and refineries where you can normally only build one of them in the area. That's actually going to build it right at your feet. So in your home base, that's how you're going to get 5 or 6 jewelers and refineries. Otherwise, the only other way to get this number of refineries and jewelers is to go out and physically walk the buildings back, because you can move buildings in the options tab. You have the option to move here and destroy, of course, if you want, and you can place it within a certain distance of you, and that's how you like walk them to your home base. If I hide the buildings and monsters here. You can see this is what the Scout Hawk has told us, that there's a Rouge NPC nearby. There's also a dungeon 1.3 kilometers away. This also showed me there's a boss nearby as well, Arachne boss, 1.3 kilometers away. That's pretty useful. So that's the Scout Hawk from the keep. You can actually use that every hour. And speaking of bosses, there is the Anku boss that we killed 3 hours ago. It's respawned. Yeah. Again, we killed the boss. And we see we've got an arena token here from the boss. It's a very common drop from bosses. Bosses will also give you a decent amount of kingdom gold, more experience, etc. And another important building that we can find in the wild are Arcanists, which is this grey building here. We pop in there. Now you can actually buy spells in Arcanist, and there are actually some unique spells that you can only find in Arcanist, and they're actually fairly important throughout the game. Actually, most of them are going to be ward related spells. For example, these Rampart and Ward of Steel. Yes, you can actually learn these in skills, but there's Ward of Mithril and Ward of Ortonite, which are only found in Arcanist. You can't learn them from any other classes. The spells are tied to certain tiers, so you can only buy spells up to and including your current tier. This spell up here, Flash, is actually quite nice as well. It blinds your opponent. It's an even cheaper smoke bomb. I'd say in the early to mid game, just buy any spell that you can if you see them in Arcanist, because you want to try and get that achievement for learning 60 spells. That will quickly boost your Orn income. Otherwise, the most important spells to learn from Arcanist are, as I said, Ward of Mithril and Ward of Ortonite. So other buildings in the world which you might come across are inns or taverns. These can give you random quests to complete. You can see I've completed this quest here. Bang that in, get some Orn. Good for getting Orns, gold, and experience in the early game. Also good for pumping up your leaderboard rank. So as you saw how I manually completed that quest, you do actually have to manually accept and complete in quest. You can also, in the inn, recover your HP and mana for gold, and you can also ask the tavern for more information. It's basically like a Scout Hawk that we just did there. I'm not sure it's actually going to have any information for us. Yeah, here, because we're at my home base, it's shown all my local items, things like, but it's going to show you things like shrines, clickable items like wood and stone as well. So, you know, definitely don't want to mark all of those. If you've accepted a quest from an inn, it's going to show up on your map. It can be quite annoying if you're on a road trip and you have 20 or 30 inn markers on your map. So you can see these buildings further away are all randomly generated buildings. This is going to be a wild shop. We've got the alchemist that we were in earlier, another wild bestiary here. And then you can also build outposts. You can only build one outpost per area, and outposts are like an extension of your keep. From here you can access different equipment. You can also access different followers. So if you found a dungeon or if you found a player you want to take down in PvP to get control of that territory, you can swap out your pet by building an outpost. And the final building we're going to talk about are dungeons. Dungeons become available for you to enter once you reach level 50. And they require gauntlet keys to enter. Now you might have noticed on your character main menu, you have the option to enter your menu gauntlet from here. And gauntlets and dungeons are effectively the exact same thing, they just have separate cooldowns. You can actually as well select the tier of dungeon or gauntlet that you do. So just click on tier and you can select lower tier, tier 7, whatever. Anything up to and including your current tier. This is especially good for the main story quest line. If you're tier 5 and you're still stuck in the tier 1 quest, you got to kill a bandit lord and you're not allowed to go out, it's locked down, or there's absolutely no bandit lords nearby. Do a tier 1 gauntlet. If you've got enough keys, do a tier 1 boss gauntlet. You're going to find the bandit lord straight away. Another annoying quest in the main storyline is the Lizard Lord, which only spawns at water. So, you know, if you've got no water nearby, the easiest way to complete that quest is by doing a tier 3 boss dungeon. You're going to have a separate cooldown on your menu gauntlet, and then each individual dungeon that you find in the world is going to have a cooldown there as well. So you're just starting out and you're wondering where to get keys from. Well, actually, so there's a couple of good ways to get gauntlet keys. Firstly, new daily rewards, keep an eye out for them. Just logging in might give you a chance of having a good number of gauntlet keys. The other main way are going to be by killing bosses. So I'll bring up on the screen what are the main early game bosses to kill, which grant you gauntlet keys. But again, here comes the advantage of actually moving around in the world, finding different bosses which are going to drop you those keys. Remember again, as we killed that Anku boss a second ago, there's an 80% chance for those bosses to respawn in the same place. So if you found a boss which drops gauntlet keys, like any of these on the screen now, you know, you've got a good chance of finding more gauntlet keys by going back and killing them after 3 hours, if they respawn. So to clarify again, dungeons and your menu gauntlet are effectively the exact same piece of content. They just have different cooldowns, and you can access your menu gauntlet from any location, whereas dungeons in the world, you obviously have to be physically nearby so you can see it. So let's enter a dungeon. This is a normal dungeon, costs just 1 gauntlet key, and the thing to remember when you're doing dungeons and gauntlets is that any stat buffs that you cast will last for the entire dungeon. So it's a perfect place to buff up your attack or magic, your offensive spell. Also for most classes you're going to want to buff up your defense and resistance as well. As long as you're not doing hard mode, you can actually use items to do that. So let's use magic defense tonic here. That's going to buff up our resistance by 1 arrow, and we can use a defense tonic to do the same. So if you're struggling for skill slots, especially in the early to mid game, remember you can use tonics as long as you're not doing hard mode. And of course you're going to use potions to heal yourself up as well. So we kill that, and you can see the buffs remain into the next fight. They are going to remain throughout the entire dungeon. Your health and mana and your ward for that matter are also going to continue on through the entire dungeon. So although you can enter dungeons and gauntlets once you reach level 50. For a start you might not have any gauntlet keys by that point, but also you're going to be leveling fairly fast, and dungeons and gauntlets, they have dungeon only mobs and bosses as well, which typically give you really good gear. And also due to the fact that the buffs remain throughout the entire dungeon, we tend to recommend players start entering dungeons at tier 5 once you've got a few skills where you can really buff up your defense and resistance using the double up arrows, either using Golem's Fortitude from Druid, or there's a couple of skills you can get. You can get Protection 2 from the Centurion class at tier 3, and you can also get Magic Shield 2, I think, from the Sorcerer class at tier 3 as well. So unlocking those classes gives you the opportunity to really buff up your defense and resistance, allowing you to more easily complete dungeons. And especially if you can manage to do boss dungeons at tier 5, there's a really good chance of getting like really solid gear for your tier. Weapons especially, that's the big one. So you can see here we've got Berserk mob. You can get Berserk monsters in dungeons, especially if you're doing endless mode in the end game. It's going to become pretty hard to take down. We're actually not wearing any world farming or experience gear at the moment. We're actually wearing I think the best gear I have. If you're low on health, it's definitely worth using potions to get back up, because on completing dungeons and gauntlets you will see Godforge? No. Okay, I'll quickly mention Godforging. You have to kill, this only comes at tier 9 and tier 10, but essentially you need to kill bosses which have the glowing yellow effect. Either Arisen bosses at tier 10 or Mammon at tier 9 gives you the opportunity to Godforge. It's a very low chance. But anyway, on completing dungeons or gauntlets, you're going to get a victory screen like this. You can see you get Orns from completing the dungeon. You also get random materials up to and including your current tier. I didn't get it here, but you will also find previously completed quest items. That's NPC quests and also main storyline quest items like the Band of Gods, Old Northern Crown. These are endgame items, but just as an example, for a lower tier item would be Alden's Hat. You can find these items at the end of dungeons randomly as well. This is not a great example. On the written guide, I've got a good example of finding a rare high quality item. So that's buildings done, I think. Alright, let's talk about combat mechanics in Orna. Yeah, it's a turn-based game, and I'm sure you realize by now that the attacker always goes first and then the defender uses AI to fight back. But we're going to talk about stats and buffs and the damage equation. How do we actually know we're going to damage someone? How do certain skills do more damage than others? Why do some skills do damage, some other skills do not? And the damage equation is stat dependent. Every class in the game has some base stats. Leveling up will increase those slightly. And I want to clear up a question I get a lot, which is regarding specialization. A lot of the specs change your base stats, but these apply only to your base stats. They don't apply to your total stats, including gear. So for example, the Cataphract, I get 12% to HP, and HP and mana are the only two stats that do actually get increased by the said amount by the specialization. However, defense and resistance, increase of 10%, that only applies to my base. So for example, if I've got a lot of gear on, and let's say I've got 2000 defense, before going to Cataphract spec and then changing to Cataphract will give me plus 10% defense, you might expect you're going to end up with 2200 defense, whereas in fact you might end up with only an extra 50 more. That's because the 10% is not affecting your total defense including gear. That's only affecting your base stats before gear. And then remember, there are stat bonuses like the Origin Town bonus, Dukedom bonus, Party bonus, as well as offensive stats with the weapon proficiency bonus, and those bonuses stack together multiplicatively. So if you've got 10% from Origin Town, 10% from Party bonus, and you have 5% from your weapon proficiency bonus, that's going to give you 27.05% increase to your offensive stats, which is extremely significant. So bear that in mind for specializations. Now let's talk about the damage equation. I'm going to try and simplify it as much as possible, and then we'll do a couple of fights in the arena so I can explain. So we're just going to disregard damage over time for this damage equation. This only applies to active damage using skills. The two main ways of damaging your opponent are using attack or magic. There are some skills which use a hybrid of the two of them, but they basically combine attack and magic against defense and resistance in a similar way that I'm going to explain individually, but it's much simpler to explain one by one. To do magic damage, it's going to take your magic stat and compare it to your opponent's resistance stat. Likewise, if you're going to do attack damage, that's going to take your attack stat and compare that off against your opponent's defense stat. So this equation, I've written it down for magic damage against resistance. The exact same applies to attack against defense. I'll explain to you in a second what you Most skills will either be attack or magic, dictated by a sword or a staff next to the skill as you're choosing it for your skill loadout. So there's two parts to the equation. The first part in brackets is based around penetration, and the second part is based around extra multipliers which are going to increase your damage after you've actually penetrated your opponent's resistance or defense. Now there's nowhere in the actual game itself that tells you the individual penetrations of each individual skill. There's a spreadsheet called Hidden Information available from the Orna guide website, EasyX, big up to him. So that spreadsheet has listed every skill in the game. Each one has an M1, which is basically a skill penetration factor, and M2, which is a skill multiplier. So let's look at the first part of the equation, and it's basically a trade-off between your magic, your skill penetration against your opponent's resistance level, and any buffs applied to their resistance, halved. Notice in this part of the equation that no magic buffs apply. That all applies after the penetration. So magic times M1, so you can see you need to ensure that your skill actually penetrates your opponent's defense before applying any damage multipliers. So if you're using magic and you do 0 damage to an opponent, that means they've got at least double of your magic stat as resistance. But remember, buffs to resistance and defense do apply to the penetration part of the equation. So let's do an example. So for this example on this character, you can see I've got attack of 108 and my defense is 217, which is just over double. We're going to go into the arena and go to mirror, so we're going to fight. Please feel free to go in the hidden information and check for each skill. You'll typically find that multi-hit skills have an M1 of 1. And then you have skills which do slightly more penetration. So over here I'm going to use Tricut, which has an M1 of 1, and we should do 0 damage. Nothing. He's used protection 2. I'm fighting myself, but the defender has used protection 2, increases the defense by 50% here, so there's no way Tricut is going to do any damage. However, Double Edge has an M1 of 1.75, which means we should be able to actually damage ourselves here. Why not? Okay, I use Warcry, increase our attack again. Tricut is still going to be doing 0 damage, but Double Edge will do a slightly bit more damage now. 26 times 1.25 is around a 33. So the single attack up is applied after the penetration in part 2 of the damage equation. That increased our attack by 1.25 and we went up from 26 damage to 33. So now I want to show you that the offensive buffs do not apply in the penetration part of the equation. Same gear, so we've got the same stats, but I've removed protection 2 skills, so the opponent is not going to use them. Tricut, remember, is still going to be doing 0 damage. As such, what we'll do is we'll apply Warcry, increasing our attack, which gives a multiplier of 1.25, but Tricut, it should still be zeroed out here because the attack buff applies after the penetration side of the equation. So there we go, zeroed out yet again. So I've used attack and defense in this example. The exact same applies to magic and resistance. So then the second part of the equation, that's when all the multipliers start to kick in. Each skill has an M2. Typically you'll see for the multi-hit skills they have a much higher M2, which gets applied per hit, and certain other skills have a very high M2, meaning that if you have a much higher attack or magic above your opponent's defenses, the M2 favored skills are typically going to be able to do much more damage than higher penetrating skills with higher M1 and lower M2. And those get multiplied by any offensive buffs, your faction buff, and then any opponent elemental resistance or weakness gets applied as well. If the opponent is weak to your certain elemental damage, you get a multiplier of 2 and you'll see blue damage numbers. If the opponent is resistant to you, you get a multiplier of 0.5 and you'll see red damage numbers. Okay, so that's the damage equation out of the way. The more you look at it, the more you should hopefully understand it. Please feel free to ask any questions about it as well. Do my best to help you out with it. Let's talk about battle buffs and stat boosts that you can apply in battle, and we'll just run a boss gauntlet because all the stats will keep with us throughout the entire fight. So all stat boosts stack multiplicatively with each other. My defense, resistance, and you can normally tell the multiplier weighting by the number of arrows beside the icon. The following applies to literally everything in the game except this damage buff used from the Berserk skill by Chimera or the Berserker spec. Normally a single arrow indicates a multiplier of 1.25, double arrow indicates 1.5, and triple arrow indicates a multiplier of 2. However, for this Berserk skill, the single damage up is actually a multiplier of 1.5, so it acts like a double arrow up. And if the arrow is pointing up, it's applying a positive multiplier. If it's pointing down, it's applying a negative multiplier. So on the opponent Cockatrice has got single magic down, that's actually applying a multiplier of 0.75. If it was double magic down, it would apply a multiplier of 0.5, lowering its magic by 50%, but then it gets multiplied together. So for example, right now after using Golem's Fortitude and Barrier 2, both my defense and resistance are getting increased by 1.25 times 1.5, which is 1.875, I think. So let's finish buffing up here. Similarly, now both my attack and my magic are being buffed the same quantities. If you use an item like Berserk Mushroom, which applies to all of your base stats, including dexterity, it's another single arrow up, giving me a multiplier of 1.25. So in total, my defense, resistance, attack, and magic are now been multiplied by 2.34, which is pretty nice. So we're going to go through and see if we can find any resistant enemies. So for example, this Heimdall boss is weak to earth. So if I use an earth skill here, it's going to do blue damage. So that's giving another multiplier of 2 on the second part of the damage equation. Okay, we've got a Ratty Boy, and this is resistant to earth damage, so if I use the same skill again, you can see we've got red damage now, and that had a multiplier of 0.5 applying after the damage equation. So on average, with the multi-hit skill, we've done a quarter of the damage we did against the Heimdall boss a few floors ago. Any temporary buffs that you can gain from skills like swordplay, again, just get multiplied the same as if they were permanent buffs as well. So for really to maximize your damage and things like raids, you can use a skill like Omni Strike, whether you're using magic or attack damage, to lower the defense or resistance of the raid boss. That's going to allow higher M2 skills like multi-hit skills to do more damage efficiency, finish the raid faster. Okay, so let's talk about other battle effects, mainly status afflictions. And we're going to employ the use of the Greater Yokai Pet, who'll hopefully do his job well here. So by status afflictions, I'm talking about things like dots, things that make you stun, make you miss turns, and we're just going to try and load up, see how many status afflictions we can apply to one or another here. Again, I'm just fighting myself in the mirror, and the opponent yokai has already applied frozen and burning to us. Burning is a dot. I'm going to lose 5% of my total HP any turn. Frozen is a very powerful status effect. I've literally got a 50% chance of not being able to attack, which is just insane. So I couldn't move. Now I'm paralyzed and frozen. So I've got a list on the written version of all the status afflictions I can apply. Basically, it's in a file like this where Steadfast becomes really amazing. But each status affliction is slightly unique. They have different rates of causing you to miss your turn. For example, being asleep and petrified, you have a 100% chance to not attack, whereas something like stunned and frozen is 50% chance to not attack, and they also have a different chance to naturally get removed from you. Of course, if you're in the world, you can use items to heal yourself. Panacea is the best one. Cure All doesn't really cure everything. And then for dots, they do slightly different percentages of damage, as long as you're actually trying to do an action with your character, use a skill or attack. So let's finally talk about kingdoms, which is basically the guild function. The kingdom tab is down here at the bottom left. Essentially, you can join a kingdom once you reach level 25. Remember, you can only join a kingdom within your same faction. Now, if you want to make your own kingdom, perhaps with some mates, you actually have to be level 100, as it says here, and you also need to pay 100,000 Orn. So in the early game, that's quite a steep cost, to be honest with you. So if you do want to make a guild with your mates, with your family or whatever, I do kind of recommend trying to find a kingdom that you can all join together in the first place, and find out how kingdoms work before setting out and making your own kingdom. So to join a kingdom is pretty simple. Click on the join a kingdom button, and the unfortunate thing about joining a kingdom from the main game is the default sorting is pretty horrendous. These are all kingdoms you can see with one member. These are all people who have just made their kingdoms. And really, for kingdoms to function well, you need at least 6 members, because you need 6 people to start a war, and winning wars is how your kingdom levels up and unlocks raids. So I'd say there's 2 main ways of finding a decent kingdom fit for you. You can have a look on the Orna social channels. I would say Discord is the best place to find a suitable kingdom for you. There's dedicated kingdom and recruitment channels for each faction, and obviously on Discord you can chat and see if the kingdom are the right fit for you. Otherwise, in the game, if you're searching in the game, I would definitely change the default sort and probably change it by power or rank. So you can see the most powerful kingdoms. The power of a kingdom is a cumulative total of all its members' levels. And in a similar way, kingdom influence is a cumulative total of every member's reputation. So just tap on a kingdom, there'll be a welcome message giving you extra information what you need to join. Some of the more established kingdoms will have a minimum level requirement, but hopefully on the first couple of pages here you can find a kingdom that you can join. Each kingdom can have a maximum of 50 members to join it. So here's a good looking kingdom, the Rusty Swords, minimum player level 50, so pretty good for younger players. So as you can see, there's a significant amount of power there. You can kind of guess that there's going to be active players there, allowing you to regularly hit raids, get better loot, etc. There's definitely a mix of kingdom activities. Some kingdoms are going to require you to be on every day to do your war fight, do your gauntlet fights as soon as possible. Other kingdoms are much more chilled, you can relax. If you don't log in for a few days, that's completely fine. So there's certainly kingdoms for every kind of player. So on a different character here to show you what you can actually do in kingdoms, and there's 3 main gameplay elements involved in kingdoms. The biggest one of course being raids. So you'll have raids of each tier, and you also have limited time event raids such as Scrooge here. You can see it says event a year's end. This raid boss is only going to appear in December 2020. It's likely to come around next year as well. You have the core raid bosses like Star-Lord Titan. You have another event which is like a higher level Yvonne Scrooge, and going up all the way to the Morrigan. So you can see this kingdom hasn't actually unlocked the Morrigan raid yet. Requires kingdom level 20. Your kingdom goes up a level every 5 war wins. So that's one reason why war victories are important. So to unlock every raid bosses, you need to reach level 20, which is the max kingdom level, and you actually only need 95 victories to unlock level 20 because you start at level 1 kingdom. So you can see we are level 19 in the Scream of Terror here. With 93 victories, we only need 2 more, and then we'll be able to unlock the Morrigan. So typically the dev is very good at balancing event raids to cater to both beginner and mid-game level players, as well as end-game players. Certain months will favor one or the other. So let's battle in this raid, and we can can see, much like gauntlets and dungeons, any buffs you use during the fight will last the entire length of the fight until you leave the fight or the boss kills you. So that's why it's important to buff your attack, your magic, and your defenses as well. You can't survive for very long. And then you just attack, you do as much damage as you can. The more damage you do, the more experience and the more orange you get from the raid boss. There is actually a damage limit dictating how many items will drop. So actually the maximum amount of loot you can get from a raid boss happens at 50% damage limit. Once you go above 50%, you'll get more orange, you'll get more experience, but you won't get any more items. Most raid bosses will actually drop their entire drop table for you if you do 50% damage. Certain raid bosses, such as the Morgan, they have specific rare gear which might not drop at all. Yeti is another world raid boss which doesn't always drop certain items. So you can see the buffs are lasting every turn. You're allowed to use items like potions, you can use tonics, you can use berserk mushrooms if you want to do more damage. We can do raid specific guides in the future, but essentially you want to buff up your damage and defense as much as possible, and you actually want to debuff your raid boss opponent as much as possible to do more damage, increase, basically maximizing our damage potential so we can do as much damage as possible. Because raids can take quite long, we want to dish out as much damage as possible. So raids require kingdom orns to start. Every raid you're going to need some kingdom orns. That's why we've got orns up here in the top left. How do you get kingdom orns? You get kingdom orns by winning wars and completing kingdom gauntlets. So let's talk about gauntlets first. Here we go, a fresh kingdom gauntlet victory. So you can see we've earned just over 20,000 kingdom orns here, and you can see it costs kingdom gold to start the kingdom gauntlet. It also costs gold to start wars. The cost of kingdom gold to start wars and gauntlets depend on the amount of members you have in the kingdom. And the kingdom gauntlets, the amount of orns you get from winning, actually depend on the average level of your players and the number of victory floors in that gauntlet. So let's start kingdom gauntlet here, see if we get any fights. Okay, so we personally didn't get a fight, but the way kingdom gauntlets work, there's a random number of fights that your kingdom needs to complete, and once all the floors are finished, you will then get the victory and you will get the kingdom orns at the end. You are actually allowed to shuffle certain fights. So a typical shuffle might be this one here. It's a berserk mob, so fairly dangerous. You just hold the shuffle and that fight's gone, because if you lose any fight, that's the gauntlet finished. You don't gain anything, no rewards, no nothing. You have to wait and start again. Cost more kingdom gold. You can shuffle once every 20 minutes. And it's actually kingdom gauntlets which are the most efficient way to get kingdom orns to start raids. Let's talk about war then. Oh, 100,000 orns. Whoa. This is what you want to see. You want to see victories and you want to see a lot of kingdom orns. 100,000 orns for a victory is quite a lot. So kingdoms need a minimum of 6 members to start a war. And then you go into matchmaking, and typically you'll match with a kingdom relatively similar to your level and power. Not every member is guaranteed a fight in the war. Kind of random, and I would say it's actually pretty rare to get a war this big. You can see this is almost the entire kingdom that's matched. And we can see at the bottom again, it costs kingdom gold to start wars. So you can see at the top we've got 37 wins on our side. Our opponents have only managed to kill 18 of us. You can actually check that by clicking on the defense here, and you'll roughly get about 2,500 kingdom orns per win. There's obviously a bit of random range there. That's the average. The third kingdom currency here at the top, the red one, that is florins. Now florins are used in the kingdom research. You can basically convert orns to normal gold and orns for your kingdom members using metallurgy. You can also unlock temples, which act like a global buff for all members of your kingdom over 24 hours. I think the bonuses for the temples are around 20%. So this can be like a perfect weekend event thing for your team. Pop the Temple of Knowledge, the Temple of Wealth, increase experience and orns for everybody in your kingdom over 24 hours. At the top here, hexes and blessings. These are used in wars. For example, Hex of Poison, it costs 1,000 florins to research, takes 4 days to research, then you can activate it any time. Hex of Natura here, which Dave the Grey has finished his research. This is ready to activate. You can activate it during matchmaking, or you can activate it during the war itself if you come up against a strong kingdom. At the moment there's a little bit of debate surrounding certain hexes that are slightly more powerful than others because each faction gets its own hex. You can see this Earthen Kingdom has Hex of Natura, which basically applies Rot, the basic status affliction of the Earthen faction, to your opponent at the beginning of the battle. Hexes cannot be mitigated before the fight. They can obviously wear off. So if you're Stormforce or Frozen Guard, you actually have hexes which can apply paralysis and frozen to your opponent at the start of the battle, which is obviously very strong and not really well balanced. So that may or may not last. And the way to get florins are by completing kingdom quests. You can go in, take a quest relevant to your tier, and they are basically like normal quests, giving you a number of mobs or bosses to kill. You will need to complete it manually to get the florins reward for your kingdom. The king and officers will also be able to abandon your quest. You can also abandon your own quest. If you've out-tiered the mobs that you are supposed to be killing, it can be quite difficult to find the mobs of lower tiers. So overall, if you've got a good active kingdom, everybody are contributing to finishing quests, to completing the kingdom gauntlet fights on quite a regular basis. Everybody is participating in the wars. This means that your kingdom orn gain is going to be fairly high, allowing you to do more and more raids, which is what it's all about. Some of the best gear in the game comes from kingdom raids. So if you're required to fight in your kingdom war or a kingdom gauntlet, you'll actually see a small icon at the bottom of the kingdom menu. You can tap on that to go straight to it. So for our fight, this is on my main character now. We're just going to do this war fight and let's see how we get on. So we are against Jotunheim. On this screen, it does take a few minutes to catch up. You see I just changed class. So just hold the battle. If you've applied any hexes like we applied the hex of Natura here, you can see your opponent will start with the relevant hex. Let's make sure we use the right skills here. And it's just like a normal PvP fight basically. We're going to use Spike Shield and take Danplan down in 2 turns. And then, so at the moment it's 19 all. Most wars will last for 24 hours. If all the fights are actually ended early and there's nobody that's fled, sometimes you'll see fights where people have, they can't damage their opponent, so they just leave and there will be like 2 grayed out sprites in the battle. If that happens, the war actually can't end early. If all the fights are completed, whether you win or lose on both sides, the fight can end before that. Wars start and end on the top of the hour. And normally at the end of wars, there's a 1 hour gap before you can restart matchmaking, restart the next war. But then you need another hour for matchmaking. So in reality, there's usually 2 hours between every war. So as I said before, you can check the defense tab here to see how you did on defense. Unfortunately, Danplan also killed us on defense, so we kind of cancelled each other out. Alright folks, that concludes my ultimate beginner's guide to Orna. I hope it helped some of you. If you watched the whole thing, then massive props. It took me fucking ages to make. If you've got any other questions, leave a comment, hit me up on Twitch whenever I start streaming. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching, ciao.